Hey everybody, thanks for clicking on another episode of MPH Motoe Performance and Health with Coach Robb Beams. Welcome back.
Thanks, brother.
So our topic today is strength training and why it's necessary for racing, when is best to do it, what type to do. It's gotten a bad rap over the years.
Sure.
People think, if I lift weights, I'll get arm pump.
Of course.
Which, depending on what you're doing, you could train your forearms to pump up if it's a lot of pulling, grip stuff. But I think that the benefits outweigh that if you really think about it. And there's ways to do it smart.
Yeah, well, we can do another show on just arm pump itself. But, when somebody tells me that weightlifting creates a lot of grip strength and that causes an arm pump, that's like saying lat pullback creates back pump. You know what I mean?
Right.
A lot of times with the arm pump, we're going to make some assumptions here. You're in the center of the bike. You're not behind it. As soon as your belly button's behind the pegs, you're going to invoke the potential of arm pump. But we also tend to forget, if you and I go and we get a massage, very rarely do you say, hey, do you mind stripping my forearms? We're going to go to back. We're going to go to legs, stuff that always feels good when you get a massage. But the same physiology applies. You have the skin on top. You have connective tissue called fascia below that and muscle tissue. Well, if this stuff becomes sticky because we don't give it much TLC, we don't give it much attention, it literally starts like two, scouring pads. They just start to stick. Mm-hmm. So if you get massage or do your own self-massage, just grip and lift, or there's a lot of, you can take tennis balls and massage them. But what you got to treat this from your wrist to your elbow just like you would your shoulders. Mm-hmm. So when all of a sudden our shoulder goes into spasm, we don't go, hey, we got to get shoulder surgery. Right. You know what I mean? Right. You got to get those friction points broken down or muscle spasms, whatever it may be. But when you bring it back around, full circle on strength training, we've got to remember, even if you're on a 65, sometimes these bikes weigh more than the people who are riding them. And it's I just personally believe there's not a sport more difficult on the face of the earth. I was quoted on saying that in a television broadcast. It's, you've got the weight of the bike, you've got the speed, and we decide that we're going to take it over some really big bumps. And you've got to offset that inertia. And I refer to this as a moving gyroscope because of the three-dimensional plane. You hit something, that bike can go one of any 365 degrees, right? Mm-hmm. 360 degrees. And what you don't want is to be too weak to be able to compensate what that bike's going to send. We all know the bike goes this way, you hit the rear brake. We get it. We're this way, we know we're holding the throttle wide open. But what happens when that bike kicks sideways? Yeah. And if you don't have the specific word, and it's a way overused term right now, is functional strength. But I'm talking functional strength to a gyroscope. So we'll have people that'll join our program and they're like, oh, you don't know me, I'm fit. Well, you're fit, you're just not fit to ride one of these. And that's your problem. Because you're going to the gym and you're training like just moving one muscle group. Well, unfortunately, movement doesn't include one muscle group. No matter what we do, movement is never one muscle. Right. So every muscle, if you look at like extending my arm, bicep brings it up, tricep brings it back. But for me to bring the bicep up, the tricep has to elongate. There's always two muscles. There may be some physiologist that says, there's a one muscle in your body that moves independently. That's cool. But for conversation's sake, that's why strength training absolutely has to be part of your program, and it needs to be year-round. That's a part that people screw up because when we look at periodization, preseason is all about maximizing strength. Everyone goes, yeah, strength training, I get it. Then when we go into pre-competitive phase, we still want to be keeping the load levels up, but we're starting to drop a little bit of speed work. That means we bring the load levels down. We're still lifting, but the amount of weight we're lifting goes down. Then when we get into competitive mode, we're not lifting a lot of load. But the reason why we're still doing lifting exercises is because of the supporting staff of tendons and ligaments. We want to keep the tensile strength of the tendons and ligaments strong, so that way when you do happen to hit the ground, you've got the supporting staff so that we don't end up seeing stuff snapping. Yeah. So that's why strength training, even we've got Loretta's coming up in a couple weeks. We'll have athletes that will they will lift weights till Friday before. Yeah. Not heavy. They're just keeping everything tight.
Yeah, I always looked at it like strength training is for those moments that go wrong.
That's right.
Whether you 100%. Can save the crash or not.
100%.
So if it goes a direction you weren't expecting or the bike does something, that's raw strength pulling it back. You can't finesse your way out of that.
And you just said the key word. Remember we talked about it in a previous show. You three-dimensional plane of a motorcycle, the left and the right side pegs, what's going on in front and behind the pegs, and what's going on above and behind the seat, or above and below the seat. Well, not everything can be fixed with a throttle or a brake, right? So that functional strength, that's why I like that word functional. Sitting down and just doing a seated bicep curl doesn't make any sense because it doesn't involve movement. And what we do is, I don't care if you're a triathlete, and you're in open water swimming, you've got to have functional strength.
Yeah.
This is just unbelievable because of the velocity, the weight, depending on the bike you're on, the horsepower, the jumps we hit,
and
they're
the
huge.
variations that it could come at you
So fast.
Every single different
Yes.
direction you don't know.
Yeah, I mean, something hits the side wall of the tire. Next thing you know, you're going 40 degrees sideways.
I look at a great example is Cooper Webb at Millville this year.
Yes.
Clips a tire with Chase, and he had to have the strength to fight against what that bike was wanting to do, pull it back straight enough that he doesn't crash.
Yep.
He still did crash, but he saved himself a guaranteed injury.
100%.
And then him getting spit off, again, now that extra strength you've put on is beneficial when you hit the ground and tumble.
Well, the ability to absorb impact, right?
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, this sounds a little harsh to somebody, but you've got to be able to bounce and not break when you hit the ground. I mean, hitting the ground is just part of our sport, but if you're physically strong, and we've talked about this in other shows, when you're physically strong and you supplement that with flexibility, that's your best prescription to offset injuries.
Yeah.
There's no two ways about it. You've got to be strong and flexible, because think about one without the other. Go ahead, excuse me.
They can't exist.
They can't
right?
exist by themselves.
Not functionally. Okay, so if you are talking to just the weekend warrior types or competitive local guys, or even guys at an amateur level, at a high level, what moves would you recommend? I've always been told the deadlift is one of the best movements you can do if you're doing it correctly in terms of a complete posterior chain movement.
Yeah.
What do you like?
Well, it's so funny that you brought that example up, because this is the one that gets me in trouble all the time. I think the traditional deadlift and the squat are the worst things that we can do as racers.
Is that right?
But for the wrong reasons.
Okay.
Because most people can't do an air squat with good form. I damn sure I'm not going to have them do it with load. So it goes back to once you can show me that you've got functional movement without load, I'm all for, yes, the deadlift is going to be the best functional movement for the posterior chain. You got me. I couldn't agree with you more. But show me you can do that functional movement without load, i.e. invest in a foam roller, invest in a power dot, invest in a good massage therapist, and get a good chiropractor. Because now once you show me that we've got muscle symmetry, we've got joint mobility, because you got to think about it. If I'm complaining of a shoulder injury and I look at you anatomically and my shoulders are anteriorly, they're rotated forward, is that because my pecs are so strong? Because if my shoulder rolls forward, now the muscles in between my shoulder blades are always going to be extended. Now I'm riding the bike and I just lose the front end in a corner and the front end goes away from me. Now I tear the muscles in the back of my shoulders. Is that a lack of strength? No, it's a lack of flexibility and an overdeveloped set of chest muscles, because it's going to anteriorly rotate the shoulders. So we're always looking for making sure that every joint, the bones sit in anatomical neutral. We see this a lot. We could talk about I refer to it as the difference between a pain site and a pain source. So someone will report themselves to our offices and say that their low back hurts. So if you imagine that the front of your quads attach at the top front of the pelvis, specifically at ASIS, if your quads are tight, it pulls the pelvis down and forward. Well, that creates that curvature in the small of your back, lordosis. It also, because I've taken the pelvis and I've pulled it forward and up, now I'm going to have a high hamstring tear, because that's the opposite side of the attachment.
Right.
Quads are tight. Now I have a hamstring issue as well as a low back pain. Someone says, oh, my back hurts, so I'm going to stretch it. Worst thing you can do. It's called the stretch reflex. It's a self-defense mechanism. This is what understanding the difference between the site of the source and the source of the pain itself. Tight quads are the source, but you're feeling it somewhere else.
Right.
And it goes back to strength training the same way here. When you're looking for that balance, it's, do I need more strength in my pecs and my chest? Not if I'm already anteriorly rotated. I need to get this flexible, so now I can go to neutral. Now I need to work on rear shoulder strength, so I've got front and back balance.
Yeah.
That's going to be the key.
So there isn't like a certain set of things that you're like, these are the movements. It varies person to person, athlete
It just
to
always
athlete.
starts with functional movement.
Right.
You know, if you can't get in a pike position, you probably shouldn't do push-ups because you've got this big curvature in the small of your back. If I can get your back nice and straight, now we could do a legitimate push-up.
Right.
Great, push-ups are going to help. But what are the two things that set us back? An injury or an illness. So when you can't do something without load bearing, I would be absolutely irresponsible as a physiologist to say, you know what? You can't do an air squat, but we're going to do squats with 200 pounds.
Gotcha.
Because that's the key workout. Is there an exercise that doesn't work? I don't think there is one. We're humans, right? Any movement's going to be advantageous.
Yeah.
It's about looking at the consequences of bad form that's exacerbated with muscle tightness and then muscle weakness that leads to more muscle tightness that leads to compounding and cascading of injuries.
Yeah, I think a step that a lot of people skip is some type of functional diagnosis, like you're
Yes,
talking about.
absolutely.
Go to someone who can say, do left versus right
That's
strength and movements, and go, okay, you're tight on this side. This side's stronger than that side. You obviously have an injury here
That's
or a
right.
long-standing one. I can see. Break that down. Try to correct some of that.
Well, and take
and
it a
then
step
move forward.
further. Somebody that's broken their femur, right? So they've broke their thigh muscle. The atrophy, the muscle shrinkage on that side is going to be there. So now I'm going to be left leg dominant. Now I'm throwing the balance of the bike off because I'm always going to be left leg dominant. I'm going up the face of a jump. I'm leaning on the left. Bike's always going to kick. If I'm trying to go through rhythm sections, I'm trying to go through supercross whoops. If I'm left leg dominant, I'm just interrupting the input to the bike.
Yeah.
So when you talk about a functional assessment, what we do with our athletes is we do what's called muscle symmetry. I want the left side to be the same as the right side for equal power output, but that has to be supplemented with flexibility. If I'm Gumby on my right side and I'm a rock on my left side, I'm probably going to get hurt more on the left side because of the lack of mobility, not a lack of strength. That's why I always say they have to be synergistic, not to beat that dead horse, but it's one without the other. If we think about, no pun intended, we're only as fast as our weakest link on this bike. You could mod the motor, but if you don't put the supporting staff on it, you put a stock chain on a modded bike, we're not surprised the chain breaks.
Sure. Well, there's obviously a lot more to dive into here to strength training, and a lot more information over at CompleteRacingSolutions.com. Have Robb help you through some of these. There's a lot of free stuff on there, but you can also get a membership and get more engaged
Happy
with
to
you.
help.
So you're a fantastic resource. I highly recommend people taking
Thanks,
advantage
man.
of it. So get over there and check them out. Stay tuned for more MPH videos.